Getting back to this project, it's been a few years, probably like almost 4 years. This is the 50cc Geely scooter that I got. It was running, but it would get hot and then stop running and wouldn't start until it cooled off again. Found the cylinder had a bunch of scoring, so it was like trying to seize itself. I did find a replacement cylinder and piston. I believe this was off of eBay. It was kind of difficult to source and it was not exact fitment. Mainly the ports on the cylinder did not match the engine case, so I spent quite a bit of time fixing that. This is actually the gasket that came with the cylinder, and then this is the one that I cut to fit after I modified the ports. You can kind of see the difference there. I think at this point I need to get the bearings and the crankshaft into the case, and then I can mock it up and see what the piston height looks like in the cylinder. Prepping the bearings for installation. Before I did that, I did put a plug in the hole for the oil injection, as I am deleting that. This bike had kind of a weird system where the oil pump was driven off the rear wheel, so it didn't oil the motor unless it was rolling down the road. So I'm just gonna eliminate all that stuff and just pre-mix it. This is a bearing that came out of it. It's a 6004. Got the bearings in the case. It took the seals off of both sides. Note that on the left case half, the seal goes inside of the crankcase, so that'll go in before the crankshaft goes in. And then there's this dowel here on the engine case also. So we got the crankshaft and the piston, and the crankcase is just dry assembled right now. There's no sealer or nothing. Just kind of mock assembly, making sure everything's going to fit together. As far as the cylinder and piston on this engine, I feel like the transfer ports aren't quite lining up with the piston at bottom dead center. I don't think it's worth messing with on this thing, but it's not quite ideal in my mind. I think I would want to mark the piston at the ports and maybe bevel it a little bit to help get it to match better, but for what it is, I'm not going to mess with that. So I think I'm okay to go ahead and assemble the crankcase halves together with the crankshaft in there. Put a bead of sealer on the surfaces here. Use this 3 bond 1184. Got the crankshaft positioned in the right case half. Engine case halves are bolted together. There's sealer between the halves. Crankshaft turns over smoothly and it has just a little bit of end play, little side to side play, so it's not bound up in there. Seal is installed on this side. So next step, I think I'm going to put the piston and cylinder on. Piston has an arrow on it. I don't know if you can see in the video or not. Opposite of the arrow is where the locating pins are in the ring grooves. So I'm going to put the arrow facing the exhaust port, as the intake transfer port is much smaller, so I'm thinking I don't want the gaps towards that exhaust port where it's much larger and could possibly hang out. There are pins in the grooves here that determine where the end gaps go on the rings to keep them from rotating. So if they could rotate, then they could more easily catch the edge of that port. Should not be a good deal. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble the rings to the piston, and then put the piston onto the connecting rod. I did get a new bearing. For the wrist pin, and then the pin and cylinder, or the piston and cylinder kit came with a new pin, new clips, and new head gasket. Alright, at this point I got the cylinder and piston assembled to the connecting rod. Just got to put the circlip in for the pin. I do have the gasket up here in place, so once I get that clip in, I can push it all down into place and put the studs in. Got the cylinder head cleaned up. I just sandblasted it. New head gasket, nuts. So go ahead and get that installed. Got the cylinder head installed. I torqued the 4 nuts to 100 inch-pounds in a crisscross pattern. Next I'm going to install the reed cage. It goes this way into the case. I'm going to apply some sealer to the surface of this. Just has like a molded in rubber seal, which I think you got to replace the whole assembly. So I'm just going to use sealer. Should be fine. Got the reed cage installed. Put a piece of tape on it to keep stuff out. Also put a piece of tape on the exhaust port, and I installed the stator. There are slots on there, so you can change the timing. I just put it back to where it was when I took it apart. And it's got 2 coils and 4 wires. I'm just gonna make an assumption at this point that 1 coil is for the lighting and charging, and the other one is for the ignition. So then there's a 4-wire plug. Got the rotor installed. Nothing fancy, just slid on. It's got a key in the keyway, washer, and a nut. I just put some blue Loctite on it and buzz it down with my 3/8 impact. So I think at this point I can start putting together the drive side. So I'm going to put the rear drive axle in. To start with, there's a seal that goes in first, so pound that in, seal driver, and then the bearing goes in. That'll get tapped in, and then the drive shaft comes in from the other side. Got the seal and the bearing installed, and there is a retainer plate that holds the bearing in. Before I put the rear axle in, I'm going to install this bearing and pilot. Just goes right there. I think now is a good time to address this. This is like a safety lockout for the Kickstarter. It would actually come through this hole lever out the backside, and I think it went into the rear brake or to the kickstand or something. It would actually hold this lever out in place so that the Kickstarter would not engage unless the situation was met to activate this to disengage it. In the interest of keeping this thing as simple as possible, I'm just going to eliminate this. I'm going to put this 1/4 inch pipe plug in from the back side of this hole. Got a 1/4 inch pipe tap that'll make some threads. It's the right size hole. I don't need to drill it out or anything, so if I do decide to put this back in here, I can. Got the threads tapped. This is the plug. I'll put some sealer on it and that'll just go right in there. Just getting ready to bolt the side cover on. I just set it in place without any sealer or anything, just to make sure I didn't have any fitment issues, nothing's binding. So now I can just take it back off. So it does hang up on the dowel a little bit. So yeah, got that new bearing installed. Not too much here. So yeah, I'll just put a bead of sealer on the case and install the cover. Alright, I got a nice bead of sealer laid down. So I'm just about to put the side cover on. I'm gonna let it sit for a minute to kind of skin up a little bit. There was a gasket on this, but like everything, it's like impossible to find a replacement part for it. But that's why I dry fit it, just to make sure that nothing bound up without the gasket on there. So this should be okay for what it is. So this is the setup I came up with to install the new bushings into the front of the engine case. This is a front suspension ball joint press for like working on cars. Just like imagine it's just a super heavy duty C-clamp. These come in very handy, and I think you can get them pretty affordably now on Amazon. I bought this one probably 25 years ago when I was working on cars, and it was expensive at the time, but like I said, they come in handy. Installing the starter next. It's actually held on with the two front and lower side cover screws, so just be aware. So on the back side of the drive, there's this bolt hole here that goes all the way through. That's actually for this breather bolt. It's like a banjo bolt, it's drilled through. And there was just a metal form clamp that held the hose in place there. I made this plate to go in place of it, so it'll just that goes right there. And I put a little bit of blue Loctite on that breather bolt that goes into the hole. And just snug that up. It gives a nice breather passage to the drive. I've assembled the rear brakes. Before I took it apart, I labeled the shoes so I knew which way they went, because they are a little bit different. So that was helpful. And put a little bit of grease on this pin before I installed it. I'm gonna wait to put the lever arm on till I actually install the engine, so I'm not sure if the position is gonna matter. So I believe I said before I'm not gonna use the oil pump, so I'm gonna make a plate to block this off. I took a piece of paper and just like laid it on there and rubbed my finger on it to make a little template, and I'm just gonna make it out of this piece of aluminum. So I'll just lay that on there and mark up my holes and then cut it down. So I tape the template down and then center punch the mounting holes. So I'll go ahead and drill those holes before I cut it down, just to make it easier to manage on the drill press. Here's that block off plate I made for the oil pump. It's kind of crude, but literally just made a paper template and drew it out of the aluminum. Drill the holes first and then cut the rest out on a bandsaw. I'll throw some sealer on this flange and bolt it down. There, the cover's installed. So nothing too fancy, should do the job. Alright, I feel like I'm at a good break point in this video. I got the engine assembled and all the drive components in there. There is no oil yet. I gotta look up what this thing takes for oil. There is a fill plug here, and then there's a full plug here. It's actually just a screw hole in the side cover. So you take that out and you just fill it until it runs out of there. And then it's full. So the brake assembly, I plugged off that lockout for the Kickstarter, the breather. So now I gotta wait till I can get the rest of the bike out of storage, and then decide if I'm gonna try and just pull the electrical components off of it and try and run this thing on the bench, or reinstall this back into the scooter and then run it that way. I think that's kind of going to be my plan, is get it back in the scooter, get it working, and then if it's decent and reliable and it's not locking up anymore, then I might explore the build idea I have with it, which is just basically making a super compact mini bike. But if the motor's not reliable, then it's not really feasible. That's why I'm trying to not get too involved in this project, but at least show the disassembly and the assembly of it, as there's not a lot of information out there to be found about this engine. Thanks for watching.